Welcome to the MVP Show. Today we have Ulrik Carlsson. He's a business solution lead from eLogic and also known as the NZ CRM Chart Guy. Full show notes can be found at nz365guy.com/241. Now let's get on with the show. Hey Ulrik, welcome to the MVP Show.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you on here. And of course, every time I hear your name, you know what goes off in my mind, right?
I hope so. Has it something to do with charts?
No, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't. That's the thing. What goes off in my mind is the movie The Knight's Tale.
Yes.
And
one of my favorites.
And I hear that guy yell out, Ulrik von Liechtenstein. And yeah, I always associate that with you, man.
Awesome, thank you. It's not, Ulrik's not a common name, right? So when your name hits one of those pop culture references, sometimes it's bad. It's really annoying, but this was one of the good ones. I got lucky with that one.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, you're known as the CRM Chart Guy, and I have referenced you in so many of the different trainings and mentorings I've done as somebody that chose a niche to get into and made an incredible brand for yourself by getting really, really good on one thing. Not saying that you didn't have, skills across a lot of things, but really built your brand out around charts.
Right, exactly. And it was kind of, I don't think I necessarily intended it that way. It kind of came about that I was tasked with some specific dashboard and chart customizations, and I'm pretty stubborn in making things work. So I played around with those a lot, and I found a lot of methodologies, XML customizations that I could do that I hadn't seen any blog posts around. So I figured, at the time, I'd already been working from home for a couple of years. So where I learned things were from other blogs, reading lots and lots of blog posts, etc. So I figured, I'm going to throw my head in the game, see what happens. I love building those charts. I've been working with business analytics for a while, and thought that was like a fun area to do, and I had some unique content, so I went for it. And I think for the first year, maybe a little bit longer, I think I had 50 visitors per month. So it was a little discouraging, and I actually pretty much made the decision to, I'm going to give up. Nobody's reading my stuff anyway, so whatever. And then I actually got a couple of positive comments on my blog, and I saw other people started linking to it, and I was like, all right, I'm back in the game. I'm going to start writing more.
Isn't it interesting, as in what struck me just then and what you said, is one, you're thinking of, calling it a day, and then a positive comment from somebody or a few folks all of a sudden kind of, amped you up. And I think we kind of underestimate sometimes how much positive comments can be to somebody that's creating content and kind of putting it out there in public and opening themselves up to criticism and negative feedback. But, it's, I think in this community, everybody has a part to play. Some people create content, some people consume it, and some people's jobs it is to, and all of us really, is to encourage each other through comments, etc. Because it is like a shot in the arm, right?
Right, exactly. And it's sometimes, like when you're blogging, we don't get paid to blog, when you're community. You're just kind of just doing it because you think it's fun. You learn a lot from blogging when you write a blog post about a specific subject. So, you definitely get some personal education and benefits out of it. But on the other hand, like sometimes the only real payment that you get every now and then is, obviously you're building your brand, but is when somebody actually thanks you and say, hey, that was really cool. I used it. That saved me a lot of time. Something is a big part of the, kind of the benefit. I say, I managed to put something good out there.
Tell me, you started off as CRM Chart Guy, and of course, charts and BI, and it's evolved so much. Have you now? Are you fully in the Power BI side of things? Are you still doing stuff in the traditional charts, which were part of Dynamics 365? Just a bunch of people on the audience here will be in the Power Platform and not know necessarily what those charting elements were back in the Fetch XML days. What's the landscape now for you?
So the existing dashboards and charts, the one that I was originally writing about, are definitely still there. I think some of the things that happened with the unified interfaces that we actually lost some customization capabilities because they changed the platform from like the Microsoft .NET charts to something called high charts, which is a little bit different. So there are a few things that we couldn't do any longer. They were also got a little more restrictive on the cosmetic changes that we could make to those charts, which kind of impacted a lot that I had written. I think one of my benefits was for a long time, probably like 4 years from when I started writing till the unified interface really started coming about. Everything I wrote back when I started 7 years ago, for like 4 years, that was still a blog post that you could reference and use. And most people who are blogging in this world, right, is what you wrote 4 years ago is completely outdated usually. So I had some good longevity on a lot of the posts there, and then unfortunately with the unified interface, like most of them became somewhat obsolete in one go instead of gradually.
Mm-mm-mm. What do you think the state of play is like from Microsoft's perspective? Because there was, let's wind back through to 3 years ago. There was a very much an impetus that Power BI was going to be the way forward, from the charting engine or BI reporting engine for Dynamics 365. Then, of course, as you say, this new charting objects came out. It was way less functional from the ability to customize and change the visual elements, etc. And there was a lot of talk about embedded chart objects being a big part of it. Whether you embed into a form, dashboard, things like that. We've not, correct me if I'm wrong, and it might be my ignorance, but we've not really seen much difference from Power BI's integration to Dynamics within that interface and particularly the modern UI in 3 years. There's been no advancement to my knowledge.
Until a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, now see that's the gold that we're looking for there. Tell me about a couple of weeks ago.
So the issues with Power BI and for a long time were primarily two issues. One of them was security. Security didn't apply in Power BI. Right? You take your data, you put it somewhere else. You now have a data model that's optimized for analytics, which is great. You completely lose the security context that you had from Dynamics or your model-driven app in CDS. The other thing was the latency on the data. It was always going to be at least an hour late on seeing the data. And you're a salesperson, you're a service person, et cetera. I mean, you're a salesperson, you update your opportunity. I win an opportunity, $1 million. I'm going to go to the sales leaderboard and check out my position, take a screenshot and send it to everybody, right? I want to do that right then and there. And I'm not going to say, hey, I'm going to come back tomorrow and do that, right? And check my new position. That's not going to work. So those were those two issues there. And that was like where you would say, I'm going to go back to the old charting engine and really use that. So what happened here a couple of weeks ago, still in preview, was that we got access to the TDS endpoint, which meaning we could actually use a direct query SQL connection into CDS from Power BI, which means that it actually fixed those two technical issues around Power BI and charting. So with that endpoint, it could actually pass the user ID, query the information right then and there under the security context of the person who's viewing the report. Not the person who created it, but the person who's actually viewing it. So the data they would see there would be identical to the data they had access to in CDS, which is pretty awesome. Maybe not so much for me, because one of the things that I've been doing the last couple of years is actually emulating dynamic security using the Power BI row level security. So I guess I have to find a new trick to to start doing, right? That's what happens. And the other one was the real-time element, right? It's a direct query. So whenever you make a change, you come back, it's going to query the data right then and there. And I actually did some side-by-side comparisons where I basically had the same visual between the old chatting engine and Power BI and just load them. And I mean, Power BI, because it is not native within the model-driven app or UCI, it is loading a component from another service on the Power Platform. It is slower, but we're talking a couple seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, somewhere around there. So when you have some of those visuals there that are more complex in nature, or they simply have maybe more than 50,000 records, which is the original limit of those standard charts, then you can very effectively use Power BI.
Yeah. So what are you expecting to happen in the coming year, 2 years? Do you think Microsoft will, one, reduce that latency, as in even though it's a couple of seconds? Do you think it will be it'll give the perception of a much more native experience?
So I think one thing I believe is going to be more important than that latency, like because we're talking down to a couple of seconds slower than the other reports, right? So if your visual is worth waiting a couple of seconds for, which I very much hope it would be, then I don't think people have an actual issue with that, and that's something that's going to be, performance always increases, better servers, better coding on the web browser and all that stuff. So I don't think that by itself is going to be that important. What I think is going to be a key difference for Power BI really making it in the model-driven app space as the charting engine is making it easier to use. Because right now, where you have the standard charting, one of the things that's so awesome about it is that you pop it out, you have it, all your fields are listed based on the schema name or the display name that you have in Visual. So any user can basically go in and you'll pick the field names that they're used to, estimated revenue, et cetera, on opportunities. It's familiar data. You pick and choose whatever you want. When you start doing that with Power BI, you have a much more starting from scratch scenario. Unless you did some prep work or somebody else did some prep for you, everything has the schema names. You don't have to necessarily do the relationships. That's actually something that the TDS endpoint do for you. They actually manages the relationship for you, so you don't have to do that. But you might be missing some few data points. You have to structure all of that from a much more database-oriented version of the data than you would with those built-in charts. That might be a bit of a challenge for some people to say, hey, I'm just going to do a quick report or do something quickly and then save it and reuse it and share it. So the curve of starting to use Power BI in your application while it has dropped significantly, it is still much higher than the individual charts. I think making that piece easier to get started on, it definitely took a huge step towards that. Is going to be the key in making it done, and then make it fit as well into the product as the standard charts. Here, for example, I'm thinking you have a standard dashboard chart. You click on your funnel chart, which I love to hate. You click on it, you click on a bit stage, maybe you do a drill down, and you have all your records on the side, and you just click on the records and open it. Everything built in. If you want to do the same thing in Power BI, you have to put all your data together. You have to create a calculated column with the link, and then you have to insert it in a table. You have to make sure that new column that you calculated with the link is formatted correctly. So it's an active link, etc. That's all these steps that you have to do, which are essentially built in. I think that's something that Microsoft would have to focus on to get it to the level where it's as easy to use. I think that's much more important than saving a few seconds here and there.
Yeah. Do you think that's on their radar? And are you having any discussions around encouraging those type of outcomes?
So when I have my opportunity, that's one of the benefits of being an MVP, right? You get to talk to the product team every now and then, and that's the type of things that I say, and what type of fields, etc. When you have a lookup field, for example, it's a big challenge. Like if you only get the ID when you're doing analytics, it can be really difficult to work with when you just have the grid of an associated salesperson, it's much, much easier if you just get the name, right? That's something the TDS endpoint actually handles for you, much easier than some of the old ways that we were doing Power BI. So whenever we get an opportunity, that's the stuff we say, and the whole spiel that I just gave you, right? Whether or not they listen, we don't really know for sure, but we get to say it, and we know they hear it.
So you presented a lot of events in the past, pre-COVID, and so now, if I was asking you to roll out a presentation tomorrow, is it going to be around the TDS endpoint and that these two big challenges that you've had for ages have been solved, and then kind of what the individual should go out and do to learn? Is there I'm asking two things. One, do you have that presentation ready to go? And two, is there still quite a gap of understanding educational content, etc., in executing in this, with this new technology correctly?
Right. So I don't have a presentation ready yet. I'll be honest. I'm still playing around with it, and you're finding some of the uh, benefits, pros and cons of using the TDS endpoint as opposed to using the common data service connector in Power BI, because we actually have now what seems like two competing connectors to get your CDS data into Power BI and use it. And one of the things that I'm playing around with now is actually the performance on it. If you use the common data service connector, when you import the data into Power BI and you have that 1 hour delay, for example, you can import much more data into Power BI than you can with the TDS endpoint. The TDS endpoint will time you out after about 2 minutes. So that's a max. I haven't played around with it, but I'm guessing it's around 200,000 records, somewhere around that. If I try to import 350,000, it's going to fail. So some of those things there to find out, making the decision tree on where to go is something I'm still playing around with.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So, I mean, we launched straight into this conversation quite quickly, and one of the things that I was remiss on doing is, of course, just clarifying your background. I know you're based in the US now, but where are you from originally?
So I'm originally from Denmark. Grew up outside of Copenhagen, um, and that's actually when I was going to school there. I got an internship, or actually a student job, not an internship, but a student job at a software company called Computer Associates. Now they're just called CA, but back in the day they were called Computer Associates. And they were, I think that at the time, this is such a long time ago, they were like the fifth or fourth largest software company in the world. So a lot has changed since then. But I got a job in the marketing department, and this was the summer of 2000. So, Mark, you're kind of in the somewhat same generation as I am. So you remember the summer of 2000 in the IT industry? That's where we had the big IT bubble burst. And one of the things that happened was that a lot of people in the industry got laid off. So what happened was that me as a student helper who got hired to essentially lick stamps and envelopes and put them in the mailbox, um, the CRM database that they hadn't started on yet just landed on my desk, and see what you can do. So that's when I started reading the book on it. That's back in the day you had to read books on on your database software, right? And basically start learning it and figure things out. And so that's where I really got a taste for CRM and just working with customer information or people information, and kind of figuring out who are your advocates in the market? Who is it that responds to our mail and all attend all these things between the different companies and people, and figure all that out and kind of systemize it. So that kind of stuck with me through my whole career and being that interested there. So I was there for about 2 years, mostly part-time, and I'm transferred on to working. That was an ACT database.
Wow, yeah, I remember that.
ACT,
Mm-hmm.
ACT
Yeah,
exclamation mark, all
yeah,
caps,
that's it.
right?
That's it. Yeah, I've worked with it.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so, and then I moved on to working for another company where we were doing an SAP implementation. So I worked a little bit there with SAP CRM. And from there, I actually took a year break, went to the US to finish up a bachelor in business. Um, and worked there for not worked there, but took about a year's break to do that. Moved back to Denmark. There was a lot of back and forth there, and got a job at a smaller company where just that week when I started implementing Microsoft CRM. So that was in January 2005, version 1.2, CRM version 1.2. And then you're probably asking yourself, well, if you work with version 1.2, why did you stay with it, right?
Yeah.
'Cause
But I started on that myself, and I stuck with it because I could see a vision of what was possible in the future.
right. There was a lot coming, right? There was a lot of faith in what it was going to be. The organization and we worked a lot. We really wanted the Outlook client to work, which was dreadful at the time, right? But we have come a long way since then. But that was actually an interesting decision because that meant I had kind of been an in-house CRM admin, and doing that in multiple different places. And here at this company, I actually ended up also being in charge of it and also being the buyer and finding the partners, et cetera, that we were working with. So it's kind of like at the other side of the table here where I am now as a consultant, where I've been in that industry here for the past 10 years.
Who and how? So I was having a conversation earlier today with another MVP, and they were saying, sometimes you come across people and you're like, aren't you an MVP? Like, I just thought that you were an MVP already, and these are individuals that are not MVPs. And when I remember the backwards and forwards, and I'm pretty sure I vouched for you coming into the program some years ago, you were one of those people that was doing so much around the chart space, and we're all like, why is Ulrik not an MVP? It was just like nuts to us. Why do you think it took a long time for you to? And tell me about that period of time. How did you become an MVP? How did you ultimately get that welcome letter?
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting journey, right? Because as most MVPs, I did not start out with the intention of becoming an MVP. It was just a fun thing to do, and I started writing more, and then you start applying to go to conferences and speak about your specialty area, and you get picked up, and then you meet. And that's when you start meeting people who come up to you and say, "Hey, I thought you were an MVP. Why are you not an MVP?" And that's kind of what seeded it in my head to say, well, and also from starting to get to know a lot of the MVPs and kind of the in quotation benefits that you get, because the benefits are not necessarily tangible. They're very intangible in terms of access to the product team and information, which makes your both your job and also your community work easier to perform, right? So that's kind of where I started working on actually trying to actively at least line up the things that I were doing so it was more I would say friendly towards becoming an MVP. Just so make sure that if you go to a conference and do a talk, right, you make sure you follow it up with a blog post about the same topic. So you want to make sure you spread out your content as much as possible for visibility. But for me, that was a long process, and I still have to thank you and I think there was at least 10 other MVPs that nominated me at the time. But it did take 2 years, over 2 years, 2.5 years from my first nomination to actually getting it. And it's a frustrating process because Microsoft doesn't necessarily give back to you and say, hey, you did this and this and this. That's great, thank you, but you're missing in these other areas, for example. They don't tell you that. You apply and you get a yes, no at some point. I've heard they've opened up more. I know some people have to have conversation with some of the people involved, but at my time it was basically just your plan. It was the same thing. It was like getting to the point where do I even bother trying any longer? Because and you've been doing this for a long time. I just got my third MVP award, but it takes time to submit all of those contributions that you have done, right? And you type them in, and and you have to do a big part of self-promotion, which, especially me coming from Denmark, is when I sit and write about myself, I like to say, well, I wrote this blog post and I like it because I was talking about this new methodology that I don't believe anyone else has written about. whereas some other people are like much, much better at promoting those facts, right? And make it sound, I kind of, tend to, in that context, tend to trivialize what I've been doing. So I don't know how much that may have factored into it or not, but I think my best advice there, if anyone who's interested, is be consistent and don't give up. I think that's probably the most important part. If you keep being there and you keep landing on those people's desk, eventually they're gonna say, eventually they're gonna let you in.
Yeah, so true, mate. This has been a great little episode we've done here. But our time is up, and so I'm going to just go through some quick fire questions. These are totally random questions that I'm keen to ask. And so, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, you're in a bar. What's the first drink you order for yourself?
A beer, probably Pilsner or an IPA.
Nice. If you could create one holiday, what would you create?
Oh, we're coming right off all of these discussions. I would say Juneteenth.
Yeah, nice. What's one of your pet peeves?
People not using solutions.
Cool. What's something you believe earlier in your career, but you think differently now?
Mostly everything.
Mm-hmm. Anything specifically?
Anything specific? Asking for help earlier was something that I was not good at doing. I spent a lot of nights reading, but just sometimes asking for help can get you to things a lot quicker. I learned a lot from it, so I don't necessarily regret it, but that simply might be something I would revisit or I have been rethinking.
Would you rather have gas or have bad breath?
I was going to say that's a tough one. Bad breath, that might be easier to deal with.
Okay. If you had to change your name, what would you change it to?
That's a really interesting question because named Ulrik and living in the US is sometimes very, very difficult. Back when I was in college, sorry, this is not a short answer. Back when I was in college, I actually used to say, it's just like short for Rick. Like how people name Richard, you call them something else. So back then I just said, it's Rick, just because I wanted to like kind of fall under the radar for some reason. But over the years, as I've been getting older here, I kind of say, you know what, Ulrik it's very unique. We have Sir Ulrik von Liechtenstein, right? And so I would no longer change it. But had you asked me that question earlier, I would say definitely I would have come up with something else.
Yeah, I think you should change the Carlsson part of your name to von Liechtenstein.
Right.
That is awesome. Just one other thing on your name is it a Viking name, Ulrik? Is it Viking?
So I don't believe so. It's actually of a German origin. However, it's a Danish spelling, and it's supposed to mean rich and powerful.
Wow. Okay.
So,
well,
I'm working on it.
I love it. I might be having a little boy. Don't know the sex yet, but I have a baby on its way, and I'm just wondering.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if Ulrik should be in the naming pool of options, because it does have appeal, definitely, to me.
How are you going to handle being an MVP and having a baby?
Oh, piece of cake, mate. Piece of cake.
No, not a problem.
Yeah, not a problem.
It takes a lot of time.
Yeah. But this is my second child, so yeah. I have one to a former wife, and he's 15 now. So I got through it once. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Mate, if people want to connect and follow your blogs and you on social and things like that, where can they find you?
CRM Chart Guy. CRMChartGuy.com as my blog, and then my Twitter handle is also CRM Chart Guy.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed listening to these podcasts and the various episode guests we've had on air, feel free in your favorite podcast app to leave a review. It would be much appreciated. Full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com/241. See you next time.